And joining me now on the show is TNT's very own Scott Wheeler. His program is called Through the Looking Glass, and Scott is an investigative reporter. Scott, welcome to Compass.
Oh, thanks so much. Good to be with you, Jason.
Look, I appreciate your time today, and I wanted to get your take on this story. It's the what I would call the misinformation wars. You've got America going after China, saying that they're creating misinformation, and China has retaliated in kind and letting everyone know that they think that the US is the biggest propagator of lies in the world. What's your take?
Well, China has undertaken a pretty wise strategy. They understand that the American people don't trust their government right now. So, by fighting back, this was a State Department report that detailed Chinese propaganda, global propaganda, that's part of its messaging, global messaging to defend itself against the attacks that it has bad intentions with regard to Taiwan and some of these countries that it's right now funding for Belt and Road projects, or in Africa, the Middle East, and the Balkans, that area, East Asia. And so they've countered it by coming out and saying, "How dare you? You're the biggest propaganda agents in the world." And the United States people know that its government does engage in propaganda. In fact, it uses propaganda against its own people here. And so China may be trying to connect that to saying the US government is a propagandist, asking its own people. They don't trust them. And there is a high level of distrust among Americans of the US government institutions right now, probably the highest it's ever been, perhaps since the Civil War. So it's a smart play by China, and it's also dangerous for the world because China is a real threat to global security, and especially to the United States, and also to folks in Australia as well.
Yes, it's a big deal because a couple of developments in today's news. One, that the UK has made huge contract awards for AUKUS to build submarines, which of course is to defend against China. The idea that people are not trusting in the United States the new recommendations for new vaccines, etc. It seems that people are over, and this is an example of the way that people are just rejecting now the government narrative, saying, hang on a second, it's not nearly as bad as you told us it was. We're not going to take any more vaccines, and the vaccine uptake is quite low. That's an interesting point, because during COVID, of course, all countries around the world seemed to be in cahoots. They had all the same recipes for how we were going to provide a solution. It didn't work, and yet they're all doing the same thing at the same time: lockdowns and mandates and mask wearing and vaccination, etc. And I wonder, therefore, Scott, in all of this, is it possible, as the governments now move out of COVID and into creating misinformation laws, will it be the misinformation laws that excuse a government from telling a fib? But if two governments are telling completely different stories, surely to goodness the people are going to say, well, one of you is lying and we don't believe any of you.
You make a great point. How is the government going to police misinformation laws? How are they going to establish and actually go out and prosecute these? It looks very Orwellian in its nature. Who gets to decide what is misinformation and what is not? Because I can point to many times, many cases when our own government was putting out misinformation, and sometimes intentionally making it disinformation. And so how do you know what's right and what's not? It will come back and probably cause some kind of backlash. So they could push people too far, populations too far, and create a huge backlash at them. And it will also interject a greater level of distrust among citizens, one another, and of their government. It may unite people for the first time in a long time in their response to government misinformation laws.
It's an amazing story when you think of it, because the US goes after China and has to be the big, thug in all of it. We're the global policeman. China says, no, you're not. We don't believe what you're saying. And it's meant to be some sort of tit for tat to get people on side. But it just seems that, as you said, the US people no longer trust the US government. And the same might be said in China, where many people are saying that life on the ground in China is not necessarily the pretty picture that they paint. Reading in the China Daily, they tell you that the economy is booming. And yet on this show, when I interview Chinese experts, they're telling us that they're moments away from an economic catastrophe with 70 million properties, for example, vacant. How could you ever sell a house there if you needed to, if you were stuck when there's so many vacant properties and no buyers? It just seems that we're being confused deliberately around the world now, and maybe this will just result in all governments just losing credibility around the world, and that might be the trigger for people to perhaps wake up. What do you think?
I kind of see it that way. You know, we read and hear a lot about our colleague Mark Moreno. In fact, wrote a book about the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab. And one of the things that I've observed over the years and over a long period of time is that these guys with their great plans don't often succeed because they run into reality, and that is that people are uncontrollable. And what they could be forcing is causing people to incorporate themselves versus and I mean that in the sense of the pre-1648 Treaty of Westphalia kind of incorporation, where people become villages, corporations, entities of their own, and they use that power to fight government overreach. And it seems like a lot of that is happening, especially in Western Europe. We saw that with the farmers and rebelling in the Netherlands, and places like Denmark, for example, who have just said, we're not taking any more refugees from the Middle East. We're done. And while Sweden, their neighbor, was calling them racists, they said, we're not racist. We can refuse refugees because we are not racist. A great retort. So I think on the one hand, you're seeing smaller countries taking a strong defense of their own, and including places like Scotland and the UK in some respects, while at the same time you've got global actors with their visions of one world government being decisively defeated on the Brexit being one of those recent years. I think we're heading more towards a reverse of globalization for that reason alone. You've got more and more countries and more people. We saw Spain used a heavy hand to put down the rebellion in Catalonia, for example. But I don't think that's over. I think there could be another round of that. And as more and more peoples rebel against unified government, it makes it more and more difficult for people like the World Economic Forum with their goofy ideas to impose them on the whole country, the whole world.
It's really interesting because, of course, the BRICS group of nations, they're talking about a multipolar world is the exact antithesis of a one world government. Although the one thing that concerns me in all of it is how many nations are just willingly going along with the World Health Organization and its pandemic treaty, Scott. And it was only 11 nations, one of whom was Russia, that sort of said, we don't necessarily go along with this, and threw a bit of a spanner in the works. And I wonder if that's yet another globalist ploy to move into a global government situation by taking over everyone's health.
Yeah, it doesn't look good for sure. But one of the possible problems for imposing that, the United States can pretend to go along with it on the one hand, but as soon as you get a strong leader going the other direction and saying we're not doing that, then it weakens the ability of the World Economic Forum, of the World Health Organization, to impose its will on these other smaller countries by saying, see, the United States is doing it. If the United States pulls out and a strong leader says we won't do this, then it gives other nations the cover to also do the same.
That's a really good point, Scott. And I wanted to bring it up because it was Trump who said that he would defund the WHO. I'm not sure if that actually went through and they stopped paying. But of course, Donald Trump today in a New York court looking visibly furious and perhaps even shaken. And I wanted to get your take on this particular civil case and what you think it might do to Trump overall running for the White House, if anything.
Well, I don't think the civil case has much teeth. It did kind of look like he realized that this is a war against him. And but he he needs to come up with better arguments and to fight this. And I'm not sure that he would be the right person to lead the United States at this point. I have defended him over the years, but also been very disappointed in his inability to go after the left and appoint. You know, to me, it was obvious in 2017 when he took power. Why didn't he create, instead of calling the other side, trying to get along with the other side while they were trying to slit his throat, why didn't he appoint several special prosecutors to look into all of these facets of government corruption, including the FBI? If he had those investigations going, it would have put them on their heels. They would have been less effective in attacking him. Instead, he lost the battle. The left became more powerful under Trump, not less powerful. And they, as much as they try to pretend like they are terrified of him getting elected, they want him for sure to get the nomination because he's a great foil for the Democrats. And that's where, and he's playing that part well right now. He looks really bad and he doesn't have good answers, and he's not making well-reasoned arguments on his own behalf and on behalf of why he should run the country again. He's just making these very simplistic, rather superficial observations. Oh, it's a witch hunt and Russia, Russia, Russia. Those don't work. It's not of an effective defense, and it does not change anyone's mind who might be looking at this, not sure whether he's guilty or not.
It's certainly an interesting perspective, isn't it? Because many people think that Trump is the master at foxing, making it look like he's going to be defeated before he wins, sort of this art of war situation. But now we're at the business end, aren't we? We're now in this trial season where it's going to be rolling courtrooms for Donald Trump all the way up to November 24, one way or another. And it remains to be seen whether or not he's going to do that counterpunch that you talk about. And many people think that there's unfinished business, that it's Trump's election to win and therefore to put the cleaners through. It's been a delight, Scott. Thanks for your time today on Compass.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for having me, Jason.